Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast, but we're straying away, for this week at least, from property. But I think rightly so, because so many people right now are talking about Bitcoin. Lots of people are investing in Bitcoin. And then there's lots of people investing in Bitcoin who don't really understand what Bitcoin is or how it works. So we want to remedy that. We want to help out. We like breaking down complex subjects and trying to make them easy to understand. And Bitcoin, actually, when you understand it, you realize is pretty complex to understand. So we've got a big task ahead of us. But whether you're going to invest in Bitcoin or not, by the end of this episode, we're hoping that you'll understand exactly what it is.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday property investors come to be informed and inspired. Maybe you're not expecting to be informed and inspired about Bitcoin, but chances are it's something that you've heard a lot about, would maybe like to understand a bit better, and want to understand how it relates to property as well. Well, we're going to be covering you on all of that today. And if our explanation whets your appetite, then stick around to the end, because in Hub Extra, we're going to be giving you a trio of resources to take your learning further.
Everyone, before we get into our news story, and it is quite a news story this week, just a quick note. Some people have said that they're struggling to access the Property Podcast via the Apple Podcast app. And this is not the first time it's happened. So for those who are very keen to hear it the day it goes out, we are consistent. We never miss a Thursday. You might want to check out Spotify as a backup option, or another podcast app potentially as well. I use Overcast. It's really, really good. That's actually my default podcast app. So if you're a bit frustrated with the Apple Podcast app, definitely get yourself signed up on Spotify as a backup option. But if you want to consider another app, check out Overcast as well.
So let's get into our news story this week. And this is yet another astonishing number when it comes to property prices. Nationwide has brought out its monthly house price index. This is for prices up to the end of May. And it shows that annual house price growth has hit 10.9%, which is absolutely crazy. The average property price has gone up from 238,000 to 242,000 in a month. Not long till we start seeing all those "your house is earning more than you are" type headlines. And the commentary that they give around this is all to do with people wanting to move out of the big city, as has been talked about for a long time. I'm a bit dubious about all that. They've gone and asked a lot of people why they're moving, which includes moving to a quieter area, moving to somewhere with outdoor space, and they're saying that that's because of the pandemic. But really, a lot of people are going to be doing that at any time. Like, without a baseline to know what people were doing 2 years ago, you can't really say that that data means a lot. But what you can definitely say, Rob, is that 10.9% annual house price growth is a big number.
It's such a big number. And you know, this is not the first time we've reported on these type of numbers. You know, we've been talking about there's a property boom taking place right now for a little while, and quite amazed that it's not getting wider coverage. And I'm still amazed. Yes, it's started to appear in some of the newspapers. The Daily Express recently had it on its front page, but the Express loves talking about property. It's staggering that these numbers are taking place and it's not being discussed more. And there's no agenda for wanting it covered more. It's just that I'm surprised it isn't, because 10.9%, I mean, it is absolutely massive. For everybody who's got a property portfolio right now is loving it, because obviously your own home is going up, but all your properties are going up to one level or another. And remember, this is an average. So if people have a portfolio, then chances are some properties in that portfolio, if they're geographically spread, will be rising at a higher rate than 10.9%. So although it's not news to podcast listeners, because we've been talking about it for a while, it still doesn't mean that I'm not stunned at every new report that comes out, just because they're so big. And even though we expected it because of the 18-year property cycle, there's one thing believing it's going to happen and another thing seeing it. And it's almost bonkers that the 18-year property cycle and all its predictions are playing out so close to the template. It's almost spooky. So yes, you have downloaded the right podcast. This is still the Property Podcast, but we are talking about Bitcoin. Why? Well, because pretty much everyone else is. Everybody seems obsessed with Bitcoin right now. It's up, it's down, it's everywhere. And it's everywhere as part of conversations go. People who normally wouldn't talk about investing are talking about Bitcoin, which makes it very interesting. And we've got a lot to cover here. So what we really want to achieve is helping you understand what is Bitcoin. Because actually most people don't understand what Bitcoin is. If you ask the majority of the population what's Bitcoin, I'm sure most could have a go at an answer, but most would probably run out of steam after about a minute trying to explain what it is. And that's because it is complicated. But because it's complicated, it's really, really interesting. And it's captured my attention over the last few weeks and months. And I've started to watch videos on YouTube and read books on the subject because for me, I just can't get involved with an asset class if I don't understand it. So I wanted to understand it before making any investment. So I'm going to start with helping you understand what is Bitcoin and how it works. And then we're going to move on to how it works as an investment. And as you'd expect, we're going to geek out on that quite a bit too, because we can go to some depth when we place it against the market cycles that we believe to know and understand. So lots and lots to cover. Now, while my experience of Bitcoin is more recent, although I feel by reading a few books and watching a few YouTube videos, it probably places me in the top few percent in the UK of knowledge of Bitcoin. It's not taken a lot to get there, and it's not because I've done anything special. It's just because most people don't geek out on this stuff. But while my knowledge is more recent, fortunately, Rob D has been dabbling with Bitcoin for quite a while and has also geeked out on this very subject for a number of years. So between us, my fresh eyes on it and Rob's direct experience and therefore many years of understanding of the subject, between us, we should do an okay job here of getting you to a point of some decent knowledge. Now, Rob, I'm going to ask what seems like quite an innocent question, but I'm actually setting you up for a tough start here because I'm going to ask you, what is Bitcoin? Sounds simple, but the answer isn't.
No, it's the most difficult question you could ask, really. So thanks. I think I'll have a go at an answer and maybe you can fill in the gaps or ask any questions because it gets very conceptual very quickly because it's not a physical thing, so it's quite hard to understand. So the way that I would describe it is it's a decentralized currency and it is secured by cryptography. So what do those bits mean? Well, if you take a currency like the pound or the dollar, it's centralized. There is a central authority that takes charge of deciding what money is and issuing money and all the rest of it. So they are in charge. Bitcoin is decentralized. The way it's been set up means that whoever created it, don't know who created it, which is kind of weird, has put it out into the world and now nobody has control over it. It's almost impossible for any single person or group of people to gain control over it. It's distributed across millions of computers all over the world and nobody is in charge. So basically what the currency is coded in and there is no way of changing it, which is kind of crazy. The part about cryptography is really hard to understand, but if you've heard about the blockchain, which you probably have, a couple of years ago, everything was on the blockchain. It was a big trendy thing. That's where the cryptography comes in. And what that basically means is it uses fancy maths to make sure that it doesn't get hacked and that everyone agrees on what transactions have happened. So if you think about a decentralized currency, the big problem with it is there's no trusted party in there. So if I'm sending money to you, I need to be sure that you're not going to say, oh, well, I never got it. What are you talking about? And you also need to know that if I've sent money to you, I'm not actually secretly saying, oh yeah, I had two and now I've got one, but then I go back to saying I've got two again. So how do you do that? How do you have that trust between people who don't know each other when there's no central authority involved? The answer is this notion of the blockchain, which basically means, and this isn't strictly right, but it's close enough, that everyone has a copy of every transaction that has ever happened. So you're not relying on any one person to keep records because everyone has got records. And loads of fancy maths is used to validate those transactions and make sure that they can't be changed or reversed. That maths is done by computers, and it's that computing power that gives Bitcoin its security. You've probably heard of mining in Bitcoin. What that basically means is people who are using a lot of computing power to verify these transactions, and in return, they're rewarded with new Bitcoin. And this is the last bit now. I don't know if any of this will made any sense. We'll find out in a minute. But this mining, there is a set amount of Bitcoin that will ever exist. Remember, I said the rules of the game were set in place at the start and no one can change it. A set amount of Bitcoin, 21 million Bitcoin, will ever be created, will be mined. That's happening on a schedule. When it gets to the end and that's done, that is it. No more can ever be created. And we can come back to that because that's actually an important part of Bitcoin as an asset class.
Yeah, there's a lot to come back to there, Rob. You've given a lot of information in a short space of time, so well done, good answer. But the question that a few people will be asking, is particularly if they're new to this subject, is you said, well, we don't actually know who created it, which is actually true, that there is a name attached to the creation of Bitcoin. But can you give a very quick overview of the origins of Bitcoin and who supposedly created it, although we don't believe that person's name is actually real?
Yeah, it's so mad. The name that is given to the founder was the pseudonym that he used, or she used, or they used, which is Satoshi Nakamoto. And basically, there was a forum where people talk about geeky stuff. I don't know which one it was. And this person came out of nowhere, basically, with what they call a white paper, which is basically a proof of concept for this digital currency, which had all these pieces in there. It basically came up with the concept of this blockchain that's distributed, so everyone has a copy of every transaction. And the concept of mining, it had everything in there. Then they basically coded it up, put it out there into the world, and vanished. And nobody has ever heard of this person ever again. There are theories about who this person might be, but nobody knows. It's really crazy. It's almost too good a story to be true. But the point is, even if this person did suddenly reappear and go, it was me all along, they couldn't do anything to Bitcoin. They couldn't suddenly change it, so they had all the currency. It can't be a scam in that kind of way, because all the code is open. It's been looked at by hundreds of thousands of people to verify that there's nothing sneaky in there. So it's a really bizarre origin story. And I think that mythology is part of Bitcoin's appeal as well.
Okay, so you've talked about the appeal and you've mentioned reasons why it would be appealing. But let's make it really easy for everyone, because we've talked about how secure it is, how it's corrupt-proof, how it's decentralized. And while we've given a bit of an explanation on why that would be a good thing for people, or potentially a good thing for some people, let's get to it. Like, there are two camps here. There is the camp that like Bitcoin because it goes up in value and they're making money from it. But in terms of an asset class and its raw fundamentals of why it's interesting for people, why do people like Bitcoin? Like, what is it about Bitcoin that makes it so attractive to them? Because there are loads and loads of different ways to store your money and invest in different asset classes. So besides the mania around Bitcoin, which we'll come to, we're not going to ignore that subject, we will talk about it. But besides the mania, the raw fundamentals of Bitcoin, what is it that makes it attractive to people?
I think there's a few different reasons. One of those reasons is, like you said, because people think it's something that will go up in value. So they're buying it just because it has gone up in value in the past. And we can talk about that in a bit. But the thing that got me interested in it, and that I think has got a lot of people interested in it, is the actual technology. Because a decentralized currency that you could use globally, where you don't have to trust another party, is a really big deal. Like, this is a first. Whether Bitcoin goes on to be a really huge world-changing thing or not, it's already done something which has never been done before. So the practical point of this is that you can send money, i.e. Bitcoin, anywhere in the world directly to another individual at a very low cost without anyone in the middle. And you can do it not instantly, but very quickly. So if you've ever tried sending money to someone in the US, for example, you have to go via your bank, via their bank, via a few people in the middle, all of them taking a cut, all of them take some time. It can take days. So it takes ages, it's slow, and you have to trust everyone in the middle. So it's great to have a better way of doing that. If you start thinking about countries that are less advanced or less trustworthy in terms of their banking system, then that's not just a nice to have, it's a game changer. Some of the places where Bitcoin has really caught on are places like Venezuela, where the government has control over the official currency, but they're not doing a fantastic job with it. And they put all kinds of measures in place to try to stop people using other currencies, to stop money getting in and out of the country. With Bitcoin, it's unstoppable because there is no middleman where you can just say, hey, we're not letting you do that anymore. So that's Bitcoin in terms of transactions. But in terms of using Bitcoin as a store of value, rather than just keeping money in your bank account, again, the great thing about it is you don't have to trust a bank. You don't have to trust anyone at all. You do need to actually take your own measures to keep it safe and make sure you don't lose it, but that's another thing. So that's Bitcoin in terms of a currency. But if you think about Bitcoin as a store of value, then that's great as well, because if you keep your money in the bank, you need to trust the bank. And banks are trustworthy most of the time, but not always. And of course, governments have control over banks. So it removes the need for that trust, but it does mean that if they don't have the responsibility for securing it, it means that you do. And so that's a really important aspect of this as well.
Yeah, because Bitcoin itself, the technology, is ludicrously secure. So one of the books I read said that trying to break the technology, because the level of encryption, it would be like selecting a random atom in the universe and being right. And there's 43 quadrillion atoms in a grain of sand. So I can't even begin to comprehend how big that universe number is going to be. So from a technology standpoint, Bitcoin is ridiculously secure. Where security lapses happen is when humans get involved, because Bitcoins are typically stored on a wallet, and that wallet is owned by you. But if you lose access to that wallet, you're hacked, for example, and you got a weak password, or you fall foul of a phishing scam, or many other methods, then that is when you can lose control of your Bitcoin. Because you can't go to the bank and go, someone's stolen my Bitcoin, because there is no bank. There is no authority. We've talked about that. So it's really important that if you get involved in Bitcoin, that the way you hold Bitcoin, and there are lots of different options and different levels of security and ways of doing it, the way you hold it is so, so important. There's not been as much recently, but there have been cases over the years where people have lost vast sums of wealth because their Bitcoin has been stolen, but not because the technology was flawed. It was the way the Bitcoin was being stored by the humans that was flawed.
Yeah, there's plenty of people who've been hacked, but there's also a lot more people who just lost it because there is no central authority. So it's like there's no password reset. So the simple version is you get a key that kind of controls access to your wallet, which is like a series of 12 or 24 random words. And if someone else gets that key, then they have control of your wallet. So you need to keep those words super secure. But if you lose them, there is no forgot password button, which then like sends something to your email. There's none of that. So once it's gone, it's gone. It's sort of a drawback of Bitcoin, but it's also a feature. It's like the whole with great power comes great responsibility thing. Like if you're going to have the power to have complete control of your money, which because no one else has control over it, then you have to take responsibility for it. And we'll share some resources later about getting started. And security is a really big part of that.
I think at this point, it's worth bringing into the conversation the word crypto, because people often confuse Bitcoin and crypto as the same thing. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, but there are lots of other types of currency, and they don't all work the same as Bitcoin. And again, people confuse that. They look at other cryptocurrencies and go, well, Bitcoin is one, so that must be the same, when it's not. It works in a very different way. Rob, I'm going to set you up for another difficult question here. But again, it sounds seemingly innocent, but what's the difference between Bitcoin and crypto?
So Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. It's the original cryptocurrency. But once the idea was out there and everyone got excited about the potential for this kind of decentralized currency, lots of others came along as well. So Bitcoin is the most established. It's got the biggest network. It's been around longest, but it is only one. Others have come along since. So what they've got in common is this whole point about them being decentralized, secured by cryptography, no one in charge, etc., etc. If you've heard of one other cryptocurrency, you'll have heard of Ethereum. That's the biggest other than Bitcoin. But it's very different in terms of its applications, what you can do with it. In some ways, it's way better. In some ways, it's not as good. It depends on the use case. If there's a third one that you've heard of, it's probably Dogecoin, which is heavily associated with Elon Musk. It's a bit of a joke currency, even though it's actually gone up massively in value. If you look at what makes it good or useful as a currency, it doesn't have any of those features. And there's thousands of others out there, about 9,000 by the last count. So the way I think about it is Bitcoin is like gold. All other cryptocurrencies are basically like startup investing. So like I said, all these different coins have got different features. And when you're buying into one of those, it's not established yet. It's got a bit of usage, but not loads. When you're buying in, you're basically doing it because you believe in the technology and you think that one day it's going to be really widely adapted, used by lots of people, and therefore the value of it is going up. In that sense, it is like investing in a startup. There's a small chance that it'll work and it'll work out massively. But there's also a big chance that it'll end up going nowhere. And one of the others that you didn't invest in will end up being big instead. So hopefully that makes some kind of sense as a comparison.
It does, but I think you've made a really interesting point there around comparing Bitcoin to gold. Because years ago, when I was skeptical because of my lack of knowledge, I looked at Bitcoin and go, well, how do you use this for everyday transactions? Because there's the famous story about the guy who bought the pizza with some Bitcoin and that pizza would now be worth millions. So therefore, my skepticism is, how can you have such a volatile asset that can be used for transactions? But really, and what I've come to understand, is that Bitcoin shouldn't be viewed that way. It should be viewed as a digital gold. And just like you wouldn't go into Marks and Spencer's and get a meal deal with some gold, you wouldn't walk into Marks and Spencer's and get a meal deal with Bitcoin. But in the future, you may use a different cryptocurrency to purchase everyday goods. but the chances of it being Bitcoin are actually quite slim.
Yeah, that's spot on. And I think this is a good time as well to touch on central bank digital currencies, which is something else you might have heard of. So let's talk about the digital dollar. So basically a government coming out with its own currency that is digital and maybe uses cryptography in some way. But if it does, that does not mean that it's going to be a competitor to Bitcoin or indeed any other cryptocurrency. It's going to be a completely different thing. For a start, there is going to be a central authority, but also they can still do what they do now, which is print any amount of it. So just like if you look at the stock market, there'll be companies in there that are huge, companies in there that are tiny, companies that make all different types of product, companies that are highly profitable, companies that are growing really fast, companies that pay a dividend. One share is not necessarily anything like another share, even though they're both part of the stock market. You hold different shares for different reasons, and one share is not the same as another share just because they're part of the stock market. I think crypto is exactly the same.
And we have touched on it in the podcast, but we haven't talked about it explicitly about why Bitcoin is compared to gold. We have mentioned, for those with keen ears, you may have already picked up on why it's compared to gold. But Rob, why is it compared to gold? Why is it not compared to the dollar or property or anything else? Why is Bitcoin often referred to as the digital gold?
The key reason is the point that we mentioned way back at the start, which is that there is a fixed amount of it. So there will only be 21 million of them ever. And they're mined on a set schedule. So the math problems you need to solve to mine one get more difficult over time on a preset schedule, which controls the pace at which they are released. So we already know that the last Bitcoin ever will be mined in October 2140. So there's no debate about it. That's just how it is. And that's the main similarity with gold. With gold, there is a finite amount of it, and most of its value comes from the fact that it is scarce. Yes, gold has some real world uses for jewelry and industrials and things like that. But for the most part, why do you hold gold? Well, you hold gold because you think it's going to maintain its value. Why would it maintain its value? Because there is only so much of it. The world supply of gold goes up by something like 2% per year. And mining gold gets progressively more difficult because you get all the stuff near the surface and then you need to spend more money or develop your technology before you can get the stuff that's deeper down. So an asteroid crashes into the Earth and it turns out that the asteroid's full of gold or something like that. You're not suddenly going to get a whole load of extra gold coming onto the market at the same time. It's that scarcity that makes people hold on to gold, and it's exactly the same for Bitcoin.
So Rob, while so far today we've seen pretty bullish on Bitcoin and I'm pretty excited by the concept, I think because there is so much mania out there at the moment, I feel like we need to say, pause. Don't go crazy on Bitcoin yet. Anyway, wait until we've covered more ground. And next week's podcast that we've said is coming will really then help you understand if it's an asset class that you should have as part of your investment strategy. But I've seen some stuff on internet forums, not on the Property Hub, but on other internet forums around property, people asking the question, should I sell my properties to buy Bitcoin? It sounds like you don't understand what Bitcoin is. So that's quite worrying, because while there are definitely pros to Bitcoins, there are definitely downsides and risks like there are with any asset class. And it's really important that people understand how it works and how it compares to other asset classes before going in any meaningful way. And what's quite scary at the moment is people are just piling into Bitcoin because it's going up and they don't understand how it works.
Yeah, it's worrying. And you've got to separate out the technology from the investment case. This episode, we've been talking about the technology. The technology is really cool. Bitcoin may not come to anything. There's plenty of cool technology that ends up not actually winning in its own right. There's definitely, I think, a place for a cryptocurrency in the world, but it's not necessarily going to be Bitcoin. It may be that it's just a cool thing, but it stays quite niche, either for regulatory reasons or something else, and therefore it ends up being worth less than it is today forever. It might end up being worth nothing. It might go on to be an absolutely amazing investment, but still be the wrong investment for you because it all comes back to goals. So thinking that the technology is cool doesn't mean that we're recommending it as an investment. But like you said, Rob, the precursor to investing in anything has got to be understanding it. We've hopefully made a start on that for some people today, but there's a lot more learning to do.
There is, which is why this week on Hub Extra, we're going to give you a trio of books that you can enjoy and absorb. Two are really going to help you learn about Bitcoin, and then one is going to help you learn but also entertain you, and it's actually a book we've recommended before. It's a book that we've both really enjoyed. So Rob, let's make Amazon some more money. What books are we recommending?
Well, let's start with the easy read because that might get you excited to learn more. The book that we've recommended before, I think it was you, Rob, that put me onto this in the first place, but we included it in our resources of the year, either last year or the year before, which is Bitcoin Billionaires by Ben Mesrich. And it's just a great story about the origins of Bitcoin and the characters who were involved back at the beginning, including the Winklevoss twins of Facebook fame. And actually in the book, one of the key pieces of it is following them and the really seemingly mad things that they do to secure their Bitcoin, because they've got a lot of it and they go to some real lengths to keep it safe because, like we said in the podcast, there's no one else to keep it safe for you. So it's a really fun story, but there is some useful lessons and principles in there as well. And if that sets you up for wanting to learn more, then we've got a couple of books to help you do that as well.
We have. So a book that I've recently listened to on Audible is called Inventing Bitcoin by Jan Pritzker. It's not an entertaining read, but it is only short. It's only a few hours long to listen to. And it really does help you understand how Bitcoin works. Now, we've helped you today. We've given you sort of a high-level overview. But if you want to understand on a technical level how it really works, then this is the book for you. It is interesting. It's not a book that's going to make you laugh, cry, or get giddy with excitement. It's just the book to help you learn. So is it the greatest book I've ever read? No. But did it help me understand a subject to some reasonable depth? Yes. And therefore, if you are interested about developing your knowledge further, I'd recommend it. That book then goes on to recommend the Bitcoin Standard, which I'm about to start, but as I've just downloaded it, I'm going to recommend that as well. And my understanding is that book is more of its real world applications and making Bitcoin a bit more real for you. So the first book we've recommended will help you see how Bitcoin is working in the real world and entertain you. The second book will help you understand exactly how it works, how it was created, where it came from, etc. And the third book then layers on top of the second book. So plenty of reading and resource. And as we said, next week, we're going to be back with another episode on Bitcoin. And we'll give you more resources again to help you deep dive even further. So make sure you join us for that episode.
Yep, and don't worry if Bitcoin is not massively your thing and you haven't got excited about it yet. Well, we're going to be linking it all back into property next week. And even if you've got no interest in going anywhere near Bitcoin, using it as a lens to think about property and why you invest in that and where the value is there, that's helpful in its own right. So make sure you join us for that one next week. And before that, we'll see you on Tuesday, where we're going to be answering another couple of listener questions on Ask Rob and Rob. So until then, have a great week. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.